Testing, 1, 2, 3, test. Just making sure this is working. Sorry for the brief pause. Looks like we're recording. Doing it from a different location. As you may be able to see, I'm actually at the school today, but we got some enrichment education. All this is completely optional. The Postmodern Presidency Part 1, so pretty much the year 2000, 9/11 after is what we're covering today. And we're going to start with the election of 2000. The election of 2000 is between Al Gore, the Democrat, and Republican George Bush 43. Bush 43 being the son of Bush 41, former governor of Texas, and Al Gore being the vice presidential partner, the vice president for William Jefferson Clinton, for Bill Clinton, who had distanced himself from Clinton because of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. What results is one of the closest elections, the closest election in American history. One in which Gore wins the popular vote, but Bush ends up winning the Electoral College, which, as you guys know from civics, determines who becomes president. And the state that determines it is Florida. Florida has some problems with their voting mechanisms. They're using a punch card style of voting, and there's 3 counties that have trouble determining who the person voted for, and these are counties that are mainly elderly. And the directions on the punch card said punch all the way through, and if it isn't punched all the way through, if there's a piece of paper hanging, they call it a hanging chad, then the vote doesn't count. The problem is you could tell who those people voted for, but those votes were discarded because it wasn't punched all the way out. This resulted in about a month-long recount as determined by a lawsuit from Al Gore that eventually got tossed to the Supreme Court. They ordered the recount to stop in Florida, which they determined whoever was ahead at that time would win Florida, thus the election. And Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court case, the infamous Supreme Court case now, determined that George Bush, 43, not Al Gore, would be president. His presidency would be defined by the war on terror thanks to the 9/11 attacks from Al-Qaeda. That pretty much took over his presidency, that and the war on terror in Iraq. He didn't get to focus on some of the things that he wanted to focus on as heavily, or when he did, they weren't as smooth as they should be, like No Child Left Behind, but we can talk about that a bit later. Other terrorism besides 9/11 that maybe we haven't mentioned, there was the Eric Rudolph bombing of the Olympics in '96 in Atlanta, the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh bombed a FBI building in Oklahoma to respond to the oppressiveness of the Clinton administration and the big federal government. The World Trade Center bombing in '93. It was attacked before '01. Not many people died, though. The USS Cole I mentioned. There was a Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, attacked when Reagan was president. Reagan decided to back down rather than to start an ongoing war in the Middle East. But with 9/11, Osama bin Laden orders the attack on the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the White House, all thanks to the brave people of United Flight 93. That plane never made it to the White House. So this leads to what we call the Bush Doctrine. If you remember, the doctrine is a president's beliefs on foreign policy. And the Bush Doctrine is if you support terror in any way, if you're a state sponsor, if you're directly committing it, if you're harboring terrorists, then you are considered a terrorist nation yourself. And this leads to us eventually going into Iraq and fighting a war. At the same time, we went into Afghanistan to try to fight a war and hunt down Osama bin Laden, which Obama eventually ends up getting. So what did the war on terror do as far as changing how the federal government dealt with national security? It created the Department of Homeland Security, which its main focus was to work with the FBI and CIA to prevent terrorist attacks, specifically here in the homeland. It was a new cabinet branch, a new cabinet secretary. The Patriot Act allowed the private information via text, emails, phone calls of American citizens to be collected in order to prevent terrorism. And advanced interrogation techniques, aka torture, was greenlit. Mainly waterboarding, which simulates drowning by putting a washcloth over someone's face and dumping water. This would take place at Guantanamo Bay, which is the world's most infamous terrorist prison. So that's going to do it for the Postmodern Presidency Part 1. We'll come back at you with Part 2, talks of Bush and Obama. Thank you for tuning in to this optional video.